Hello again, and welcome to this session on Beyond the Curve, leading the restart, rebuild and renew of business. Before I introduce our guests, and I'm really excited to speak with today, I'd just like to cover a little bit of housekeeping. You'll see to the right of, on the right within your screen, you'll see there's an ability to ask questions. So do keep some questions coming in through the session and I'll try to cover them all. The session will be recorded and you can play back at your leisure over the next 30 days. And we do encourage you to use social media to spread the word on anything you found interesting, etc. So you've got the hashtag ACT Middle East, I believe, and our Twitter handle is @ACTUpdate. So also just a reminder, don't forget there's the discussion forum if you want to chat about this session or any other or anything Treasury related at all, and do keep the questions coming in through this session. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my two guests of the day. So we're joined here by, in fact, one of our prize winners from our awards last night. So if you were watching those, you'll have seen that Etihad has won a team award. And congratulations again, Adam, for that and to all of your Treasury team. So Tony Douglas is the Group Chief Executive Officer of Etihad Aviation Group, which is, as you will know, a diversified global aviation and travel company. And Tony has nearly 20 years of international leadership experience in transport, infrastructure and government sectors. He joined Etihad Aviation Group from the UK's Ministry of Defence, where he served as CEO of the Defence Equipment and Support Department, responsible for procuring and supporting all the equipment and services for the British Armed Forces, managing a budget of 20 billion USD a year. Previously, he held senior leadership positions in the UAE, most notably as CEO of Abu Dhabi Airports Company and Abu Dhabi Ports Company, where he was responsible for the successful delivery of Khalifi Port. So huge amount of experience there at the most senior level in an organisation, and we're really delighted to have you with us today, Tony. Adam Boukadida, many of you will know, was appointed Chief Financial Officer at Etihad Aviation Group in May 2020, after deputising in the role from June 2019. So previously, Adam held the position of Senior Vice President, Treasury, Tax and Finance at the group and served as Interim Chief Financial Officer during the first half of 2019. Adam's remit includes group finance, group treasury, investor relations, fleet planning and the group business support services division. Before joining Etihad in 2013, Adam was Senior Vice President at the National Bank of Abu Dhabi. Outside of Etihad, Adam is a Fellow of the Association of Corporate Treasurers and a member of the ACT Middle East Advisory Panel, as well as board member of Air Serbia, Air Arabia Abu Dhabi and the British School Abu Dhabi. So welcome, gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to get a little bit of a background to the company and what it's been going through recently. Tony, if I may.
Assalamu alaikum, sabah al-khair, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And Caroline, thank you very much for inviting myself and Adam to be involved in this conversation this morning. I think everybody is well aware that the world of aviation and transport and tourism in general has been massively affected by COVID and the follow-on implications, both economically and in terms of travel restrictions. And clearly Etihad has seen the most difficult year within our history. And I sit here having observed many of the challenges that we faced together during the course of this year. I have to say, probably some might think naively optimistic, because whilst at the back end of last year we had a really successful 2019, we had outperformed the expectations within our transformation program, and even in the first quarter of this year we were 34% ahead of the previous year. We'd handled 3.5 million passengers. And it was almost at the back end of last year, what could possibly go wrong? And, pretty much as the thought came like a cloud out of the top of somebody's mind, what could possibly go wrong? Of course, we then saw volcanic ash clouds in the Philippines, the biggest bushfires in Australasian history, the continuation of civil unrest in Hong Kong, and regrettably the incident with the Ukrainian Airlines aircraft. So I think many people have even forgotten some of the things at the beginning of this year, but of course that was nothing in terms of impact on air travel compared to COVID. And I guess what clearly has occurred since then is a pretty much hunkering down of global aviation. There's probably no more than 10% of the world's global fleets active today compared to this time last year. And even IATA present a view that up to 175 million travel and transport jobs could be lost as a result of the COVID crisis. And I say that again even slower, 175 million, because of course, as we know, that's the size of 2 or 3 big countries' populations in its own right. This is a seismic shift and a seismic impact upon businesses like ours. But you referred earlier to my previous responsibility in the world of defence. And I guess perhaps in my mind, the first question is, has anybody been killed? And the answer is no. Well, that's good. Has anybody been mortally injured? The answer in our case is no. Well, that's good as well. And off the basis of that, the naive optimism that I referred to earlier is we can resolve pretty much anything else. So whilst COVID clearly and the implications thereof will be with us for the foreseeable future, I believe mankind knows that it will end. We just don't know when. And of course, the trick in circumstances like this is to be purposeful and decisive, to be bold, to make sure that you try and forge your own way ahead as leaders in whichever business context that you relate to, as opposed to metaphorically just bobbing around like a cork in the tide, allowing it to take you wherever the winds have in mind. So what we've tried to do now, and we've made some announcements earlier this week as well, is to set a very bold course to say we're going to grab this by the horns. We will do our level best to adapt and adopt to COVID. We certainly won't be frightened by it because there's nothing to be frightened of in that regard. But I think there will be many casualties with businesses who don't adjust themselves to what for the foreseeable future will be the new norm. And in some ways, again, probably looking at this in a completely different way, I guess what we try and do internally, wherever possible, but also amongst friends externally, is to say, look, if you've ever been around a big recession in the past, it tends to forge the leaders of the future. And for the people who are on this particular seminar, who are in the stages of their career where they're, clearly going upwards and they've got huge ambition, the old cliche, never waste a good crisis and embrace adversity, because real leaders are shaped in the foundry. When it's easy, anybody can do it. When it's tough, we'll all learn disproportionately. So I guess back to that kind of positive naivety, Caroline, let's all embrace this, grasp it, because it isn't going to go away. Let's make the best of a challenging situation.
Absolutely, some very wise words there, Tony. I think that creating certainty out of uncertainty, and you mentioned hope as well, really, really important things to bear in mind, and it will differentiate people going forwards. You've been a leader, you've been chief executive many times over, with a lot of experience under your belt. The last 9 months, how would you describe them in relation to your other experiences? I mean, you've touched on it a little bit already, but, and what have stood out to you as the main challenges through this time?
Well, I don't think I'll ever forget the 23rd of March, and the reason why that date is indelibly etched into my mind is that's the date when we parked up the entire Etihad fleet, and it was the start of lockdown, of course, within the United Arab Emirates. But at that point in time, I think the minute you find that one crosses a line of that nature, you have to immediately plan for what next. So in our case, I use it illustratively as an example, we immediately went into project restart, i.e. put all the effort now, not into the fact that we've parked, put all the effort into how we can come back in an organised and controlled way. And there's a lot of complexity, as one can probably imagine, in the world of aviation in doing that. It's easier to slow an airline down than actually to accelerate one back into normal operations. The second thing we did is we put a lot of effort into the cargo market, because global aviation cargo has rocketed because there's been so much capacity from belly hold taken out with airlines being grounded. So we seized upon that opportunity both commercially and in terms of providing customer service. What we also did is we said, right, we will take this time because it's a gift. It's never going to happen, hopefully ever again, where the whole fleet is grounded, to do project cabin. So we have meticulously and almost obsessively relustered the cabins of every one of our aircraft to the highest standards anywhere within the industry. They have been sterilised to operating theatre standards. They have been finished to concourse to elegance condition internally. And again, never waste a good crisis. It was a gift of an opportunity to do that. And finally, project vision, i.e. get the crystal ball out and try and envision what the future has in store. And for us at the moment, we don't think that it would be unrealistic to see, perhaps going forward, some form of wellness certification, almost in the same way which visas enable freedom of travel, which gives everybody the confidence that not their own wellness, but everybody who is sat around them on an aircraft or in an airport can be assured to the same standards. And of course, we've all seen over the last 6 months, the technology has continued to improve. We're now talking about vaccines on a daily basis. Testing is more readily available, far more rapid in response, and of course, lower cost. So we've got great confidence that technology will play a part in that as well. But to, I guess, the personal part of your question, Caroline, again, it's probably an old adage, but never try and presume certainty where certainty doesn't exist. And in a case like this, there's no book on the shelf. The crystal ball that I referred to earlier, I've joked with my colleagues, I realised that all I was able to do was predict the winter, and then I realised I'd bought it from a snow globe shop. So my crystal ball skills, my clairvoyance, I've concluded, don't try and assume certainty where it doesn't exist. Embrace ambiguity. And even for people who are listening to this now, I'd invite you to reflect over that maybe later on. It will hopefully make more sense upon reflection. Embrace the ambiguity. Don't try and create a false handrail of certainty if it doesn't exist. And you know what? Once you've concluded that it is an ambiguous situation, there is no map, there is no GPS coordinates, there is no book on the shelf. In some ways, it can, from a leadership point of view, be liberating, because again, what it makes sure we need to do then is be decisive and bold in the course of action that we elect to take ourselves. And I'd like to think that's what we've been doing here at Etihad, notwithstanding the very difficult circumstances that we find ourselves in.
Indeed. Well, it certainly sounds like you have been doing just that. And again, who knows, when's the next pandemic? So, yeah, absolutely. This challenge of dealing with uncertainty, we struggle as human beings, but it sounds like you've got a very good recipe for success within that uncertainty. Moving over to Adam now, you're newer to the C-suite and possibly certainly come with a different generational view perhaps from myself. How have you found the transition during one of the toughest times in history for a CFO? And what have been the key things that have kept you up at night, or do you in fact sleep quite well?
Yeah, good morning, Caroline. So obviously, as you articulated in terms of my background here at Etihad, I had a number of opportunities to have a taster, if you like, of the CFO remit and the responsibilities that go along with that. So being able to have 4 or 5 months in the interim role and then deputising for about a year and being part of that executive leadership team for a couple of years obviously stood me in good stead to take the role during an extremely challenging time. Having said that, I think I've managed it as well as one could do with 3 key support factors. And as Tony said, there's definitely no book that you can pick off the shelf to help you with this. But I've been blessed by an amazing finance team, the Treasury team being a key part of that you started off with the opening remarks. I've been blessed to have the great opportunity in a fantastic business here within Etihad, and I've grown within the business over the last 6 years. And of course, the extended management team and the board of directors that we work with here. So it's been an extremely challenging time. It's been very rewarding, personally and professionally, of course. And again, I may be of a slightly different vintage, but I've definitely learned a lot over the short period of time here. And I've definitely gained some grey hair, which you may or may not be able to see through the camera during this time. I think in terms of keeping me awake or stopping me to sleep, I mean, obviously I have a young family. I have a Labrador that's very hyperactive. So with the personal stuff aside, I've had to brush up on a lot of my FCT and Treasury skills, obviously for the reasons that Tony's touched upon, with limited flying, cash management, bank relationships, etc., have had to be at the front foot of everything that we do at the moment within finance. I think also we have a global team within finance, very diverse in many different factors. There's 700 people currently within finance around the globe, all with different backgrounds, nationalities. As an organisation, we have over 150 different nationalities. And finance is slightly less, but we still have 44 different nationalities to manage. And again, we have a wide spread of age and demographics to manage. Many people, including myself, haven't gone through anything closely similar to what we're experiencing at the moment. So very much the personal side has probably kept me awake more, looking at how I can manage the relationship, lead the team globally. And again, as we are doing now with the 4-hour time difference, we have a finance team all the way from the US all the way to Asia. So definitely the personal part, I would say, in keeping the team engaged, looking after well-being as well as the professional aspects, has definitely been a new skill that I've had to evolve and improve on and take an active part of that.
Absolutely, really important. And that diversity of your team is one of the things that has really struck us at the ACT, and certainly when we're looking at the awards, and brilliant, because we do know that great things come out of diversity. So it's really impressive. Thank you very much. On the positive side of things, we've seen through COVID-19 the acceleration of a number of things that have sometimes almost surprised people. So we've seen advancements in technology, we've seen ESG really taking a very solid seat at the table, diversity inclusion that we've just touched on. How does that resonate with you, Adam, that idea that certain things have been accelerated for good during COVID-19?
So I think as a business, and if I zone in on the finance and treasury part in particular, you could argue we have been ahead of many others because we've been a couple of years well into our transformation plan. And as Tony alluded to, at the end of last year, even the Q1 of this year, we was well beating our plan. It was very aggressive, just to be clear. So in terms of accelerating plans we had in place, we was already doing it in a lot of the aspects. Obviously, we've had to adjust in an agile manner to ensure that we continue that momentum and the pace that we've got in place. I think in terms of diversity, again, there's been no changes on that angle. We've got that all the way from our pilots to our crew, and then within finance, for example, we've got many different nationalities I touched upon, but at the top table as the FLT, or the finance leadership team, we have 45% already female and 2 or 3 different nationalities there as well. So there's a really diversification focus there. I think in technology, we're always one step behind as in finance because we have to follow the business evolution as well. But we've invested a lot of time, effort, and obviously capital over the years in terms of treasury technology, obviously interactions and automation. Some of our teams between Etihad and Aldar was talking yesterday at your event, along with ADCB. but we've done that more broadly with a re-implementation of SAP as our one ERP solution across finance, across procurement, and across HR. So again, the focus has always been there, but we've definitely put more investment into that.
Very good. Thanks, Adam. Tony, what would you say about opportunities that have opened up during this time?
Well, I think you referred earlier on to, environmental sustainability agendas, and, that was a underpinning foundation stone to what our brand stands for anyway. And, again, the earlier comment, one thing's for sure, COVID will pass, we just don't know when. But the sustainability agenda won't. I think it will be an ever-present. And on Thursday of this week, Etihad will have its 17th birthday. So we're a teenager. We've had some challenges over the years, to be honest, but I'll fess up. I made one or two mistakes in my formative teenage years, so I'd like to think it doesn't make me a bad person. But in a business context, at 17, just like the many people that we interact with of that generation, there's an altogether different approach and understanding to environmental sustainability. So initiatives that we had already invested time and effort into, such as the Green Liner, which is a program with Boeing and with GE, the engine manufacturer, where we were doing a whole bunch of very innovative programs on using sustainable aviation fuels, biofuels. We were looking at optimizing flight paths, all of the flights within that program on what is currently the world's most efficient commercial aircraft, the 787 Dreamliner. We're up to 15% lower fuel burn on average. And even whilst COVID's been going on, we've ran a follow-on program, which has been called the Eco Demonstrator. And this aircraft, which has been another 787 Dreamliner, a different one, in partnership with Boeing, Safran and NASA, we've been looking at piloting next generation technologies again for fuel efficiency, overall flight efficiency, but also noise reduction. So the constant in this agenda for us is we have not only pressed on, in some ways we've diverted some of the energy that has been released from a reduction in normal business activity following COVID into making sure that the things we know that will be around as ever-present opportunities to get better at getting better at will stay mainstream to us. Separately, wellness is something that we believe will become an outtake from COVID in the same way that security standards changed globally after events like Lockerbie and after 9/11. We anticipate that post-COVID, the reference I made earlier, be it more of a wellness certification or something that links the assurance of travellers that it's safe to do so, is entirely likely to become part of the way forward. So we've been pioneering, in every sense of the word, Etihad Wellness. And the go-to, if I could ask people perhaps who are interested in this to look at later, of course, would be etihad.com, which gives a clearer understanding that if you choose to travel with Etihad, the means by which our Etihad Wellness proposition will serve you. And I guess probably a build from Adam's earlier comment as well, when people talk organisationally, I find it interesting, particularly in Europe and North America, about diversity. We have got 151 nationalities. Our average age is a little over 30. I'll deal with him later for the implied commentary that he's of a different generation than me, but nonetheless that's true, of course. But with an average age of just over 30, a culture like ours that's a 17-year-old company, we get diversity even if we didn't want to have it. It's an impossible tide to do anything other than harness the energy that comes from it. And the greatest asset that Etihad has, the greatest asset, frankly, all businesses have, of course, is their amazing people. And even though we're having to make some very difficult decisions, we're having to scale down. The core component of that is still embracing the diversity that we've got and channeling it appropriately. Because for me, probably a function of a slight generation difference from him over there, is diversity is about diversity of thought. It's about the way the mind looks, considers and assimilates, and particularly to the earlier comment, when we're dealing with uncertainty and ambiguity, the more active thought that's applied, the better. And I, for one, am a very, very keen believer there is no copyright on smart ideas. They're all over organisations. And when I come back to Etihad Wellness, when I come back to Eco Demonstrator, when I come back to Greenliner, some of the best ideas and initiatives we've had in all three of those have come from parts of the organisation that ordinarily you wouldn't assume would be directly involved. So I would challenge everybody on the call to make sure, rather than just hunkering down with the crisis that we face at the moment, probably put more energy and effort and thought into those kind of agendas.
Absolutely. That's going to drive the ensure that you're successful, I think, in the future. All the research shows it. I think it's really interesting, this age diversity thing, because if you take age as a proxy for difference of thought, then it's natural. Experience is great, but actually people with a different way of thinking, a different generation, grown up differently, using technology differently, all those different things can bring such great thought into the group. So great to hear that, Tony. Also, I'll be heading over to your website to have a look myself a little later on. Just moving on now, and not trying to get too political, but in the UK here, where I'm based at the moment, there's a lot of concern around how things have been handled during COVID-19, and whilst, as you say, and the theme we've had also coming through yesterday is sustainability is the big thing we should be looking at. Long-term, COVID will pass, but at the moment it is the thing that's at the forefront of people's minds, and we do want to have some form of solution for it. Now, the UAE seems to be from looking from the outside, seems to be in a much better place. What would you say? Would you recognise that? And what do you think have been the things that the UAE, where you're based, has been doing that has been really helpful or made that difference? And what do you think other countries could learn from the UAE?
I think, look, first of all, it's easy with Professor Hindsight's hat on to look backwards and have a view around different nations and different approaches. Given the way this one unfolded, it was probably not surprising to see different methodologies, different thinking, different political pressures, of course. I think the very wise leadership within the United Arab Emirates was quite clear that public health was, of course, like it is in many places, if not just about everywhere, the #1 priority. So there was a very decisive position taken on testing, and I think you're probably aware that almost statistically the entire population has been tested in this part of the world. I think one side of my nose is bigger than the other. You probably can't see it on the camera because I've probably had about 25 PCR tests, and you know what? It's great, because what you get then is absolute confidence in your wellness and the fact that the people that are around you have no risk from your presence. I think the way in which border restrictions were put in place, again, were judged that wellness and public health was priority #1. And today, Etihad is the only airline in the world whereby 100% of the people who we travel as guests have a PCR test or equivalent test at point in origin and have one here as they land in Abu Dhabi. There's a very rigorous track and trace methodology that's in place in Abu Dhabi. And of course, what that hopefully leads to is the numbers getting into control such that one can then slightly ease off the way in which those methodologies are in place and allow us all get back to the normality that we enjoyed so much in 2019. I commend the approach here to anybody. I think there's a lot to learn from the discipline that comes from it, and the way in which testing and technology becomes part of the solution has become mainstream, quite frankly. And I think the comment before, Caroline, my sense is, notwithstanding my snow globe before, the ability for me to see in the future, I challenge my own calibration of that. However, my sense is that we will see something that will in part be supported by testing, screening and vaccine technologies that will be part of the end of the demon that COVID has brought to us.
Thanks, Tony. And you've talked a lot about physical health there, naturally. Mental well-being, of course, is a big issue, and some people say that's even a bigger issue than COVID itself. With say around the world, a third of people being affected now by mental health issues. What's Etihad been doing in that area, and anything that you'd like to share with us, your thoughts on how to keep people's mental health intact through these difficult times?
I think, look, Caroline, you're absolutely right. In a situation like this, where people's lives, their working formats have been disrupted beyond all belief, one can't underestimate the impact it has upon all of us. The things that we've done, probably, no magic formula, have been nothing other than what some people might say are basics, but nonetheless, I think important basics. We've gone out of our way to maintain engagement. I do, webcams to the whole Etihad family on a regular basis. I'll be doing another one tomorrow. Adam and the other chiefs do it regularly with all of their families, and that works its way all the way through. We've gone big on e-learning. So we've had over 11,000 people involved in a service excellence course, which is almost a year-long course, but we're a service business, right? So, why wouldn't you? Ditto, we've had over 7,000 people enroll in the e-portal we've got, which is an e-learning portal which connects with world-class universities all around the world and allows people to focus and channel their energy on learning and picking up new skills. But back to those 4 projects I explained before, after we grounded the fleet, when I talked about, restart, when I talked about Project Cabin. The cabin one, whilst it was absolutely essential for the reasons I explained, cleanliness to surgical operating theatre standards and detailing to an obsessive level, what it also did was kept the whole of the engineering team busy. And maybe that's a kind of old military metaphor from my previous background. Never keep a standing army idle, always keep them busy. Keep it constructive, and therefore you don't end up with a situation where the powerful machine that the mind is within all of us gets consumed with negative energy. And I guess the responsibility of all of us on this call as leaders is to maintain as much positive energy into the corporate culture and system, notwithstanding just how difficult things are at the moment, as you possibly can.
Absolutely, some very wise words there, Tony. Energy, hugely important. Education as well, learning. You mentioned that all the research shows learning, any form of learning, really builds resilience. So it is, it's absolutely a very good strategy there. Now we do have some questions coming in from the audience, so I'll take a couple of those before we move back to any of the other questions, given we've probably got 5.5 minutes left, I think. So one of the questions that's come in is, many believe that declined business travels trend will continue even post-COVID. How do you see that and prepare for that?
Okay, well, I think it could well be a trend. Clearly, as you'd expect, it's one we've certainly considered, and I imagine nearly every other, full service airline will have done so also. Interestingly, there's a kind of, both sides of the equation on this one. Post 9/11, within 9 months, the world was back to flying pretty much at levels equivalent to pre that terrible tragedy. Now, we're of the view that post-COVID it will take a lot longer, quite frankly, and I think most onlookers are of the same opinion. However, let's face it, the world will come back to travel. The world will come back to flying as an essential, and that's why back to the sustainability agenda, that for us is the more ever-present theme that runs in our business. But nonetheless, we've got to probably consider that the efficiency of mediums like this will play a part in a change to working approaches and styles. And one of the many reasons why we're going to hunker down for the next couple of years proudly and boldly as a boutique mid-size carrier is because we don't think we're going to see the same flow, certainly through 2021 and probably through 2022. And I think the trick, therefore, to all businesses is rather than to get to be defensive or trying back to create false certainty, the point I was making before, is to try and become as agile and as lean as you possibly can. And in so doing, I'm actually a natural born optimist. I think once we get to the back end of 21, we'll probably see things coming back as a result of the vaccines, ever-improving testing methodologies and so on and so forth, where just the excitement, the natural desire to want to carry out business, or when you're travelling, to have premium space and a premium service offer, we remain very optimistic about that. But in the short term, I think we've got to be realistic and adapt to it. And that's no bad thing.
No, absolutely not. And agility is another great point you've made there, Tony. Thanks very much. I've got a question now quickly for Adam. It's, what is Etihad's exposure on FX? How has COVID-19 impacted this from a risk management perspective?
So we have a number of board-approved financial risk hedging policies. Foreign exchange is obviously one of those. Obviously with impacts on our global sales and obviously the foreign currency associated with those sales, we've kept our policies aligned, but we've had to obviously pay particular focus on the hedging levels against the policy remits. So there's been no change. We continue with the risk management, but obviously the levels are extremely different. So hedging is not a bet, it is more a risk management technique, and despite the challenging times, whatever asset class you're looking at, we would keep the same approach, but obviously pay closer attention to the levels that we're looking to manage during the time.
Thanks very much, Adam. Just to, as we're rounding up here, I'd like to turn back to Tony, and you've given some great tips to our audience and some great food for thought there, really, really helpful and insightful, and I can see exactly why they've chosen you to be Chief Executive of Etihad. But that aside, you know, any final words, top tips on for other people to think about how they can rebuild and renew coming out of this crisis?
Well, I've got a top tip for Adam, and that is the Treasury Hunt competition that you're running. I want to make sure that he wins it, because that $500 will certainly add to our treasury, and it all counts. And of course, off the back of the flippant comment, I guess, to the people who are perhaps on this call this morning, cash, of course, is the oxygen, the lifeblood of any business system. It's all about conserving it and focusing on every last cent. And the responsibility that all of you and all of us have got is to do that now with an absolute attention to detail, the likes of which none of us have probably experienced in recent times. And it then kind of goes back to perhaps, Caroline, the point of before. After every major monsoon, after every major storm, it's normally followed by sunshine. Remember what the sunshine feels like. Don't get overly anxious about thunder and lightning. It will pass, things will get better, And if you look after the cash, the business will look after you.
Thank you very much, Tony. And thanks to both of you. Thanks also to Adam for being here with us today. It's been really, really insightful. Thanks to the audience. Thanks for your questions. Do remember there are other live sessions for you to join today. Do go to the discussion forum and chat about what you've heard today. Some really interesting, really helpful insights there that I think we should be talking about during the rest of the day. Do visit the exhibition hall. And do go out onto social media with what you've heard and share, spread the word with others. But just to return to my panelists again, I really found that personally very uplifting, hearing what you both had to say there. And just can't thank you enough for taking time out of what's a hugely busy schedule for you, of course. So thank you once again.